Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today for our counseling parent breakfast. Just as a reminder, we do breakfast throughout the course of the year. We have a different topic every month. All our breakfasts are posted on the high school website. So we do have a couple of left this year. I think we just have one left this year. So keep your eyes on that. And again, parents are welcome to come to any of our breakfast topics. This breakfast, I'll let these folks introduce themselves, but we're very, very lucky. This is a great panel. Very happy, everyone, and thank you all for coming. We get lots of questions in the high school counseling office from parents in regard to how an IEP or a 504 transitions to college. Students have disabilities, how that transitions to college. And, we certainly do our best to answer those questions. But over the years, we've found that hearing from the reps, talking to the reps about that process has been very, very helpful for the counseling staff. It's educated us quite a bit. And we've been to a few workshops in regard to this. But we figured, and Mrs. Ciccolini and I figured this would be a great, Miss Christine is our Director of Special Ed in our school system.
Hi.
Thought this would be a great option for parents to hear directly from the reps from college. So this is going to be pretty casual. I don't have a set agenda, but I would love for the reps to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about what you do and the programs you're affiliated with at your respective schools, and then maybe we can kind of see where it goes from there.
Great.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
All right, great. Why don't we start with
All right.
Ellie?
Perfect.
Do we need to move the mic?
Yeah. All right.
You have the mic.
This will be fun. Hi, everyone. My name is Allie Peltier. I am the Director of Accessibility Resources for students at Berklee College of Music, and I've been there for 7 years now.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Erin Mayo. I'm the Assistant Director of Student Accessibility Services at the College of the Holy Cross. I've been there almost about 2 years.
Hey, y'all. I'm Brad Austin. I'm the chair of the history department at Salem State University. I'm also here, I think, in part because I have a deaf daughter, and I've been in your seats wondering what's going to happen with my daughter as she goes through her educational process.
Good morning. I'm Nicole Parsons. I'm an associate professor and co-director of the program for advancement of learning at Curry College. If you don't know about that program, it's a program that's been very forward-thinking in terms of supporting neurodivergent students in higher ed. It's been doing those things since before we even had special education laws. So, and I'm excited to be here with my colleague, Sarah.
Hello, my name is Sarah Hannigan, and I am the coordinator of the SAIL program at Curry College, which is a new program that has just started this year, kind of to partner with the PAL program, which supports the academic needs of students on campus. The SAIL program has been designed to support students in their social needs, as we're seeing more and more of those types of needs happening on college campuses. Curry has kind of been at the forefront of developing programming to support students with those needs. I'm a speech-language pathologist by background, so I worked in a K-12 environment before, kind of growing up with my students and moving to Curry.
I just want to just thank you for having this so casual, because we go on the road a lot, and I was driving here and I'm like, wait, was I supposed to do a presentation? What are we talking about? And I was like, no, he said just casual, just show up. He told me to show up. And that made me so happy, so thank you.
Oh, no problem. My pleasure.
I'm a history professor. I have 45 slides ready. If you want to put people to sleep, I got you.
Well, I'll open it up with just the first question. So in high school, students, obviously, as you know, either have IEPs or 504s. So can you talk a little bit about how a student would be kind of introduced to you in your respective programs, and then maybe how that filters into a college class?
Sure. Should I go?
Sure. Mike's there.
So when students apply to Curry College using the Common App, there is something they can check off to see if they're interested in SAIL or PAL. We have different admission processes, but if folks are interested in applying to PAL, we do require their diagnostic testing, their IEP or 504 if they have one. And I think the biggest disconnect sometimes is that the laws shift from K-12 to higher ed, and higher ed higher ed is regulated by ADA law, where there's a shift from K-12 guarantees access and success. I see a lot of head shaking, so you know. So it's the disconnect, though, is that a lot of families believe that everybody who applies gets accepted, and we actually have like a lower than 50% acceptance rate. And a lot of it is focused on, the reason is their programming in K-12. So it's really important that students are enrolled in college prep classes, that they're getting accommodations, but there's no requirement for modified work in order for them to be successful, because that's what sets them up for success. So yeah, we look at their diagnostic testing. We want to make sure that they're able to be in all mainstream classes, because that's what the program looks like at Curry College, even though we're known for an institution that supports neurodivergent learners. And roughly 25% of our students are enrolled in one of our programs. There's still a lot of students that come to Curry because of that, and they're not enrolled in our program, so they're actually a much larger number of students. But they are mainstreamed, and higher ed looks different because you have a lot of different disciplines, and the professors that work in those programs are experts in the content that they teach, but they don't necessarily have a background in teaching and learning, where in K-12, all the educators have a background in teaching and learning, right? So there's a big shift, and there's a big shift in being the expert. UDL is a common practice in higher ed, in K-12. It's the conversation. We were presenting in San Juan last week, bringing the UDL conversation to higher ed. And I was a little naive because I had come from K-12 to Curry, and I didn't realize across the rest of the world how UDL is like really far behind in higher ed. And it's because of that idea that, you know, the folks who are teaching those classrooms are very experts in the content that they teach, whether it's computer science or nursing or business, but they don't necessarily have the full background and understanding how different brains process information and learn differently. So being able to successfully survive in that arena requires a lot of self-determination, a lot of self-advocacy. The ownership on the student is pretty serious. There's a lot of pressure on the student to take ownership that they hadn't had in K-12. So just thinking about that, but I've rambled way too much, so I'm gonna let Sarah talk about that.
So I can just speak specifically to my program and how a student kind of finds their way to me. It's a separate process than the acceptance to the college, and also PAL if students are involved in that. For SAIL, students are admitted to the college first, so you just apply to Curry. SAIL doesn't impact upon admissions at all. And then students and families would elect to apply to my program, and then there's an interview process to make sure that our programming that we offer is the right fit for the student, and that the student is also ready and wanting to participate in a socially supportive program at college. I have found that the students who have come and transitioned to us this year in the college setting are really ready and willing and wanting to work on the social skills and the self-advocacy piece and their involvement on campus and their peer-to-peer relations. We've had great engagement, but there's a separate application and interview process for students to find their way into our program. I know we could pass it over to the accommodation process and things, pass this on down.
Yeah, maybe y'all go, and then I can talk about from the classroom side.
Sure, yeah. So for oftentimes called either disability services, accessibility resources at a college level, students have to self-disclose in order to gain access to their accommodations in a college setting. So they get accepted to the college, they might disclose information in their admissions process. That admissions counselor might help get the student referred to different support services, but it's really on the onus of the student now to do that self-disclosure with the office that is going to be designated to assist them with the accommodations. And so for Berklee College of Music, for example, students have an application that they complete. Really, it's just to get to know them a little bit more, their experiences and academic barriers that they might be having, or maybe housing, dietary barriers. And then they have to provide documentation to substantiate their disability. That can look like the 504 or IEP, can look like a therapist letter, a doctor's letter, really anybody who can provide that diagnostic information and history. And then from there, there's a welcome meeting that we have where we really go through an intake with the student to determine what accommodations are or aren't reasonable within our college environment. So there might be things on that IEP that were helpful in the K through 12 setting that no longer apply in the college setting. And so it's important that we're having some of those conversations with students, but then trying to find alternatives on like how do we make sure the student's still supported in those areas that might not be transferring exactly over to an accommodation letter. For us, the accommodation letter process looks like, a notification email that gets sent to the faculty disclosing the student's name, the class they're enrolled in, and the accommodations. So we don't disclose any information on the letter about their particular diagnosis or disability, which is different, again, from the K through 12 setting where the teachers really know exactly why a student has these accommodations. It's now, again, the self-disclosure and advocacy on the student to talk with the office like us or their teachers about their specific needs. Yeah.
Quick question.
Of course.
Timing, the disclosure and stuff, does that have to happen prior to admission acceptance, or can it be done after?
Great question. Oftentimes, you'll see that it's happening after the full acceptance enrollment schedule happens. Accommodations are not retroactive in a higher education setting, meaning that they have to be established at the time in order to receive them. So I always give the example of midterms, right? We might have a first-year student who's experiencing barriers with testing, says, I went through K through 12 being different from everybody else. I don't want my accommodations. They don't establish it. They fail that first midterm. They then start working with our office and say, I just need some extra time on my test. We can establish that. That doesn't change that midterm grade. You're not able to retake that midterm. It's not retroactive. It's now moving forward. You're going to have this accommodation, and you can speak to this too, but oftentimes they have to renew their accommodations each semester. So it doesn't apply necessarily to the academic year because their classes are changing from semester to semester. Their faculty change, so they have to request each time. Please.
And maybe you can't answer this.
That's
Does
okay.
it affect the admissions? In other words, do they factor that in when they do the acceptances?
Not at Berkeley, right? So if students...
Maybe you can't, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So students might disclose information in their admissions process. There's often times where there's a physical disability, something visual that can't be hidden right from that process, but it's not a factor into someone's credentials for getting into the school. So, yeah.
I just have one more question. I know it's Berkeley College, but is it also the same? I know now they're merged with Boston Conservatory.
Yeah.
The same thing applies to them as well.
Yeah, so
Just to make sure.
Big Berkeley applies for the college and the conservatory. Yeah.
So we have a similar process as Allie because we all kind of follow like national kind of guidelines on what schools do. Generally, we do, like, and imagine Allie too, we have deadlines for housing-based accommodations. For if a student has like a chronic medical disability and they need a single room or something else, there are deadlines typically, so I would encourage you to look into those deadlines because typically they have to happen before general housing selection opens. So just keep that in mind as well as dining accommodations too.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're gonna build off of that.
Yeah, and that's different, right, from a K through 12 setting or even academic accommodations, that there are times where there's accommodations that have a specific deadline, and that's because there's different business procedures that have to happen. So if we have a student who, is assigned a room already and they're going to be in a quad, right, and all the assignments have happened, it's going to be really hard for us to find a single room since there's nothing available. And so that can be a really frustrating process for both the students and parents when they're not aware that different institutions have deadlines, right? So just being very mindful of that.
Yeah. And I think just going to talk to people at like Accepted Students Days. I know like I'll be working Accepted Students Day this weekend, so you can go chat with them. And if your student's like visually impaired, you're gonna want to go chat with them to like get your questions answered now. I think that's getting questions answered earlier is best. I don't know if you want to.
Sure.
There was something
No,
that
you're good.
Nicole had said about the 50%. So you said of the students that apply, only about 50% in the end are, get approved for the respective accommodations.
We have about over 600 applications each year. We accept about 300 of them, and about half of those hopefully come. And the reason why is, well, when we sit, a lot of times the reason comes from the transcript. When students come and their transcript says that they're in substantially separate programs, and there's a code that the high schools have for different, and it looks different for each school district, but admissions can determine whether or not they've been in college prep classes. So that's a big thing. And most times that's the reason why, is because they weren't in the right classes to begin with. We would never turn someone away because of their disability. In fact, we've changed a lot of our programming because our enrollment has changed, because we've been doing this for 55 years, and we started as a program for language-based disabilities, and now those represent like 5% of our students because of technology innovations that have helped these students, right? The majority of our students have executive functioning challenges and ADHD, but then we have these students that they present on paper as being gifted, but communication continues to interfere with their ability to be successful, to be socially integrated. And so that's kind of where we developed the SAIL program, which is like more focused on the social integration rather than the academic piece. But it is important to really think about what it is that the students need. If they're investing in higher ed, and higher ed's supposed to prepare them for the workforce, well, what is it that they need, and how are we catering our programs to meet the unique needs of the students that are coming? You know, we have to evolve and adapt as our enrollment does. And we're also seeing a lot of students that have significant psychological anxiety, depression, OCD. A lot of it comes from just being students from the COVID generation, right? And now higher ed has to take a look at that and think about what ways are we adapting and evolving our programming to meet the unique needs of the students that are in the pipeline. Yes.
Is the PAL program, do you apply to Curry first and then apply to PAL, or do you apply to Curry through PAL?
Either one. Some students apply at the same time. Some students apply to the college first and then apply to PAL after. There's no rhyme or reason, but and like just in terms of what I heard at the end of the table, in terms of accommodations, it's true. I mean, students, they're in K-12 and they have an IEP or a 504, and they just have all their accommodations. And then they get to higher ed, and whether they're using a structured program or they're just using Office of Accessibility Services, they most likely will have to apply for their accommodations, not only every semester, but sometimes for every single exam. Like we require students, and it's 5 days before the exam. I mean, obviously, if a student calls us the day before, we do cater, but we continuously stress like the 5 day before thing, because there's a lot of things that happen structurally with housing, with even classroom assignments. I always tell my students, you know, it's cool to go around campus and figure out where your classes are, but just know that the day before, that location can change because someone might have went to Office of Accessibility Services and needed some kind of physical accommodation, and now boom, you're not in Kennedy anymore, you're in a different building, right? And that happens, and you know, we do the best we can to make sure everyone has what they need, but it is helpful for the system to disclose early if you're getting accommodations.
College has changed a lot since I was in school, and I went to UMass Amherst, and I'm just thinking of like the large lecture halls, and then as you declare a major, the classes get smaller, and you get more individual attention. When my child applies, and we're looking at these different programs, and she self-discloses, because the classrooms are so diverse, and the teachers have such different teaching styles, how do we know what accommodations we need to ask for up front? Or can those accommodations be tweaked as the semester goes along so she can keep up with the changing dynamic of the class?
Do you want
Yeah, great, really good question. So accommodations can be adjusted throughout an entire time frame of a student's experience. And so it could be that we take this initial intake and we establish X amount of accommodations, they're in classes, they're experiencing new barriers, they can have another conversation with us to explore what can we adjust, a new letter can be sent out. Accommodations can look different from one class to another in the same semester, or completely different from the lecture-based classes to, in our case, performance-based classes. Or once they're in their major, they might not have as many tests, right? There might be a faculty who says we're working on a large project, so testing accommodations no longer apply. So everything is really individualized. It's specific to the class, and then it's specific to the individual outcomes of those classes too. So it's a great example about assignments, right? This blanket notion of you just get extra time from when the day it's due. In high school, it's often due the next day, right? So they accommodate in that space. But for another class, you're working on a huge project that expands an entire semester. And so let's work on some of those strategies to get your assignment done. There's no need to extend a time for an assignment that you've had an entire semester to be working on, which can be a really tough conversation, honestly, with parents and students when they're first arriving to colleges, because it feels like we're taking away something that you've had to really fight for in an IEP or a 504, and that's not the case. We're really just looking at it based off of the design of the classes, the individual student, and the outcomes of the class.
So when students are enrolled in PAL, they don't use Office of Accessibility Services. They get all of their accommodations through PAL, and they work one-on-one with the professor in the PAL program. And how the curriculum is designed, because all of our courses are credit-bearing, so students who enroll in PAL do earn credit. They earn 3 credits a year. And then we have a summer program that's 4 credits, and we have some intercession classes. And it's like that conversation, but it happens all semester. So they sometimes for the first time are really diving deeply into their diagnostic testing and understanding what is that processing speed, what is that working memory, what does that mean, right? And then they preview the syllabi for the semester. They understand how they're going to be evaluated. They understand what ways they might prefer to learn versus what ways learning might be challenging. They set some goals for the semester, and they fill out those accommodation forms. And sometimes we do adjust the accommodation form, but it can't be retroactive. But there might be a student that's like, I don't want to record lectures, because they don't want to because at first maybe they don't want to they don't want other, I don't know, maybe they just feel weird about disclosing that they need to record. And then they bomb the first few quizzes, and we're like, oh, there's this new app called Otter AI, and you get a free subscription if you go to Curry. And not only will it record your lectures, but it will also give you the notes. It will give you study guides. It will do all this crazy stuff for you. So then maybe after the student bombed a few tests, they want to try Otter AI, and then we can go and adapt the accommodation form and request that they record the lecture. That's something that has to have consent from both parties. So the professor has to consent and the student, and that's like that across the country. But so there is some wiggle room, but it's an ongoing conversation, and the need for accommodations could shift, as you noted, from professor to professor, class to class, assignment to assignment. It's called Otter AI, OTTERAI. Yeah, there is a free version, but it only allows students to record for half an hour.
Can you spell that again? Otter.
It's like otter, it's
Otter.
like an animal.
We're going to write on the board. I'm a teacher. And so maybe it may be helpful for me to say something from the faculty perspective. One thing I think it's really, those who put together the panel, it's probably important to note that we have a lot of different types of institutions represented here. And so you're hearing from a regional, state, public university, the highly selective arts college, the performing arts college, the college with very specific programs that, at Salem State, if to your question, sir, we're not looking for reasons to not accept students. Like, we want to accept students, we want to support them when they're there. And that, from a faculty perspective, I'm not involved in the conversations that take place. I'm usually the one who gets the emails or has a student come up to me and I have to sign off on it and say, look, I have an accommodation, I need time and a half. Great. I need to take my exam in a quiet space. Sure, you can use my office. It's not confrontational. I've been teaching in college over 20-something years now. Whatever accommodations that your students bring to their professors will not be the first time the professor has seen that accommodation. People have different personalities, but they should be willing to roll with it. We want our students to succeed. We want them to learn. We want them to get an accurate assessment of how much they know and what they can do. And so most accommodations are not especially burdensome for the professors at all. I have to send it 24 hours ahead. I have to clean off my desk. But it's really is the advice I would give to your students. This advice, this things you're already practicing now, I'm sure, with your office, is self-advocacy, stay on top of things. Where students get in trouble with me, students who need accommodations, students who don't, it's when they ghost me. Is when they miss this one thing, or they're anxious about this one thing, so they don't come to class for 2 weeks, and they come back, and I don't know how we can make that up. We can try, but you missed, we have 30 class sessions over the course of 15 weeks. If you miss 5 in a row, I mean, you do the math. I'm a historian, I can't, but it's a lot, and it's tough to catch up. And so the skills they're developing now in their programs about, my daughter, who's deaf, she ran her 504 meeting. She knows what she needs. She transitioned from middle school to high school. We don't need this. We need more of that. A teacher says, I don't think you need this. And she said, well, actually, I kind of still do for that. Having those skills now and having her take responsibility for it is probably more important to her in the long run than whether they're using a sound field system or where they get acoustic kind of muting carpet or whatever in the room. It's just this is her thing. It's her life. She needs to learn how to take care of it. Those skills really pay off in college. When your kid comes up to me after a class, hey, Dr. Austin, I need this. Great. Yeah, we'll make that happen. It's no problem at all. Anyway, so that's the faculty perspective. From the parent perspective, what you're saying about, I'm already thinking about my daughter. This daughter's in 8th grade. She's deaf. She's going to need a fire alarm that will shake her bed. Because I've been in hotels with her when they're going off as loud as possible, and she can't hear it when she's asleep. And so we're going to have to talk to housing people. We're in admissions. We're going to be talking to disability services. We're talking about accessibility programs. And if you're worried about if it's going to affect your kid's application, the Accepted Students Day is when to do it because they don't know who you are. And they're not tagging that with a specific person. It won't affect the application, but if you're worried about that in the back of your mind, then just on these Accepted Student Days, make sure you go and talk to those folks and say, how do you handle this? Do you have experience with this? And get answers. And if you're not satisfied, there are a lot of other schools that can educate your kid. You want to go to a place where they're going to be supported and they're going to feel safe and they're going to be challenged. Sure.
Can you speak a little bit to just recommendations to help parents prepare their kids for this transition? For example, someone mentioned needing diagnostic testing. For entry, how recent does that testing need to be? Is that something where they need to have had a reeval with the schools within a certain time frame, or have sought out private testing?
This is one thing I'll say, and then I'll pay it to the experts, is that at Salem's, I'm department chair, so I go to meetings where people in these offices brief me about things. And it seems at Salem State, at least, is we're just moving to accepting. We don't want the students to have to spend $2,000 to get the accommodations. If they have a well-documented IEP at Salem State, we're going to accept that as proof of need. And then then the conversation begins. Okay, that's what you needed. We know we have the checks the box so we can have the conversation. Now we figure out what's needed in college, but the extra testing and stuff, it's just, I hope that's...
different from one university college to the next.
It is.
I guess if you could speak a little bit to some of that sort of entrance criteria or things that
Documentation requirements is going to differ vastly. It's probably one of the most contested topics within accessibility in higher education. So the institution can set what their specific guidelines are for that. There's no regulations or laws that say. From my point of view, it's very similar to Salem State. I went to Salem State for my undergrad, so probably where I got it from. Thanks, Lisa. And it's really about, we want to make sure students are getting the access they need. So your ADHD diagnosis is not going to differ from a 2022 to now 2024. You still have ADHD, right? So that's kind of our viewpoint behind it. However, there are times where we might need to request additional documentation for any sort of new diagnosis as students saying that they have, or specifically with housing requests, there's often more guidelines around what's needed for those, because we really have to look at what is our capacity in those spaces. So the documentation is going to be really helpful. So my advice is whatever institutions that your students are looking at, being aware of what their documentation guidelines are so that you're able to prepare those different requirements in advance. So for example, I know that there are institutions that say you have to have documentation that's within the past 2 years, regardless of what your diagnosis is. There's other institutions like ourselves where it's like, you have cerebral palsy, if you can express that in a narrative and you don't have documentation, let's get you what you need right now, and we can work on things afterwards, right? So it really is dependent.
Can I just point out real quickly, I'm sorry, but this is true at the high school level too. We just had our 5-4 meeting. We had to prove our daughter is still deaf. I said, sure. And the school, the Office of Disability Services, Student Services recognized it was absurd, but said it's one box they have to check. We're dealing with educational bureaucracies.
Yeah.
It's going to be complicated.
I'm sorry, I just want to interject to your question. At the high school level, usually students will get a reevaluation, whether at some point within the 4 years of high school. Correct me if I'm wrong, Christina, but that usually will fall to one of those years. So for a student on an IEP here at Burlington High School, the testing would be completed within that 4 years. So when the student's applying, if they choose to disclose they have a disability, they would have updated testing. A 504 is different, it's not special ed. So really, depending on the testing needed, the district doesn't test for 504, so that would be an awareness for parents that if you're on a 504 plan and you do plan to pursue or disclose the disability, that college may ask for testing. So at some point during the first 4 years, if you are on a 504, while in high school, you may want to look at scheduling that to be completed. Certainly, depending on the disability, it would depend on what you would need. Like I would think with a child that is deaf or hard of hearing, that's basically pretty straightforward. You wouldn't need to go through a whole psychoanalysis testing.
We just said, look at her physical. It says she's deaf. It's,
So I just want to interject with that. I'm sorry.
I think that testing's only good for 3 years or something. It won't take them all the way through college, okay?
Well, so I guess from the college perspective is, if their testing is from freshman year of high school, is that recent enough for you, if that was their last reeval as freshman or sophomore year? But, if I can, I have a question, sort of. So I have a daughter who's gonna be a junior, and we're doing complete neuropsych this July, so that it would cover her the next 2 school years, as well as the first year of college. So I think that's, based on what I've learned, that's kind of where we have to be.
It's often that you don't have to resubmit documentation once you get that initial registration process with an accommodation office. It's really only if there's new information or new requests that are beyond what might be already stated in the documentation.
Right.
But again, it's going to differ for each school.
Right.
But I would say, at least from Holy Cross, Salem State, the ARS, or Berkeley, the initial documentation will take you the 4 years.
Okay.
You don't have to continuously.
So I'm just preparing, and I think that for anybody who's in this, who's gonna have a junior, that is what I've been told.
Yeah.
But even so back to what you were saying, I think my daughter's last IEP evaluation was sophomore year, right? And all her diagnoses are in, her academic disabilities are in that IEP from sophomore year. That is enough documentation for college.
It depends on the institution. It really does. Some institutions won't accept just the IEP because like technically the person who wrote the IEP, like they're relying on testing. So in some way we need the testing, even if it's older testing, right?
So when you apply to that institution, you need to be asking those questions of what.
You need to be asking those questions, yes. And
Testing is, I've only ever tested through the school system, so I'm just curious, that testing is also available privately?
yes.
Yeah, you wouldn't need to do it, you could just continue with the school's testing if a student's on an IEP. It's gonna happen automatically every 3 years, so, and in my experience, grade 10, you go through the battery of testing, that will suffice when applying to college.
What we're seeing a lot of though in our admission process is that parents are for some reason waiving the testing. So even though it's students or families are eligible to have the testing renewed every 3 years, they're staying on an IEP and they're waiving the testing.
Because
We're
they
seeing
say
a lot of that.
disability is static, right? So why do we need to test? So think about that again.
daughter.
If your reeval is due junior year, even though you may not need new information for your school career, it may be relevant for the college transition process. So
One thing to be familiar with is the RISE Act, which has been in legislation now for a few years. We've kind of loosened our admission process a tad bit as we followed the RISE Act. The RISE Act is basically a piece of legislation that's saying that in order to qualify for ADA, you don't have to have the updated testing, that you just have to have some sort of documentation. For example, if you were diagnosed with a neurological difference 10 years ago and it's not curable, then that's all you need. You don't have to update. It makes perfect logical sense. So even though we might have on our website that we do require updated testing, we also have some language that says to send us what you have, because we review each admission file with a holistic lens. Like each person's story or journey looks different, and whether or not we would like to see updated testing would be dependent on what information we have before us.
I know some universities require freshmen to house on campus. What if that's really a struggle for a student because it's the social part? The part being manipulated very quickly. And so do any of your colleges have that? That they have to?
For us, we have first year's guaranteed housing, and after that, folks have to find their own off-campus, so students are able to waive it. However, there's always a process, right, of what you can and can't request. So that would be a question that would ask either the admission counselor of, are there accommodations for students to not live on campus, right? And they would most likely give you exactly who you need to contact, because it could just be as simple as, filling out a form with the housing office to say, we're just not going to come on campus, to no, there has to be a formalized reason behind getting you off campus, for example. But I would take a look at the different options available for students living on campus. So there's a lot within the housing and residential education setting to help support students in that transition, right? So there's living learning communities, for example, so students can select a living learning community that best aligns with them. For example, sober living, right? For us, we have a tutoring living learning community where students are able to go into those communities and feel a sense of belonging in a space where it's not just just general, and I don't know who's gonna be on this floor. And then there's different programs too, like at Berkeley, we have our MIND program, which supports students who are neurodivergent, who we do a pre-orientation program where we help students have a sensory-friendly move-in experience. We do community programming, trainings for students to build that sense of community within the residence hall as well. So there's different support services to make that experience still accessible for individuals, so you can go kind of either way there. I don't know about housing.
I think that was a great answer. It's
Yeah.
very similar. Our program operates in a similar way with an early move-in, sensory-friendly housing.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I failed.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Apologize.
With our program, similar early move-in, sensory-friendly housing, we do have a commuter option, and that we're actually finding that is very popular. And that makes a lot of sense to me, having supported this population of students for a long time. So the commuter piece and doing our program, there's support and coaching available for students, even if they are commuting.
There was dialogue with the university. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I know there was some that were like, freshmen have to live on campus, so I was like, oh, this is gonna be a.
Yeah, I think
Especially,
college campuses are becoming much more aware of the needs of students and moving in that direction.
Got a question of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if any of you can answer this, but I figure with your expertise in being on other panels with other colleges, are other colleges this accepting of trying to provide the students with these kind of accommodations? Or are your schools just so unique that you do over and above and you're so kind and gracious to the students?
We're very special.
Yeah.
I think we're all trying to be. I think if you get into education, you get into education because you want to help people learn. And I think colleges especially have really staffed up offices like, I'm a historian, right? I'm not in these offices, but entire careers based on making sure that college is accessible to people. I think Salem State's a very special place, but I don't think we're unique in any way in this. I think if you go to any of the other state colleges, universities, you'll find people who can say the exact same things. There are good people who are doing really important work trying to support your kids.
I have a thought about this.
I think it required by, doesn't every college that accept any federal funding?
Yeah.
require to have-
Accommodations are required.
Yeah, accommodations are federal law, so I think every college should have an office.
Or at least person.
Yeah.
What's that?
Or at least a person.
So my thoughts on this are that this is really an opportune time. We've had in the past few years corporate America come to Curry and say, what has Curry done in higher ed that you can help us do in corporate America? And this is all like some of the key drivers of the neurodiversity movement, which is a huge shift in how we view the idea that all brains are different, and it takes away the fact that there are students that have neurological difference, and it accepts the idea that there's also students that just have different learning preferences. We've been doing a lot of training or different types of consulting with corporate America and building partnerships. We just invested $1 million in a neurodiversity center at Curry College. And you'll see some of the key drivers of this movement are language shifts. For example, Office of Disability Services is now being renamed Office of Accessibility Services. There's a lot of pressure to think about the way we talk about students. We've even shifted some of the language that we use within our own community. For example, instead of saying PAL students, we say students and PAL because it puts their identity first. So there's a lot that's going on in terms of the neurodiversity movement, which has created an extreme interest among colleges and universities in terms of looking at their own programming and thinking about ways that might be more supportive. And so where like some programs that have been around for a long time were the only ones, now like pretty much any college that you walk into is gonna have some type of support. So that's pretty cool. And it's also pretty cool to think about how that support will then follow them to the workforce, right? So.
Actually for you, Brad, because you had mentioned this, but you said how you have some students as a professor in college that advocate for themselves. So in those students that really are good at advocating for themselves, is there anything you could tell parents or advice on what could those children do in high school to prepare and be ready to advocate that way? Because we do have kids, you know, obviously in high school, more so when they're younger, they're shy or they have a hard time communicating with the teacher about accommodations, so the counselors will often help kind of facilitate that, but I know in college that won't be, so just any.
Yeah, so in college, it's lovely to meet y'all, but if your student comes to Salem State, I won't talk to you, all right? The relationship is entirely with the student, not with the parents at all. I think just give them practice. You know, you get better with reps, whether it's in 504 IEP meetings, whether it's ordering from themselves at restaurants, whether it's and also labeling for my mind. I really like, hey, that was really good self-advocacy there. That was really, hey, you stood up for yourself. I appreciate that. I liked how you did this. And just saying it and reinforcing it. And also pointing out, hey, that was an opportunity for you to do these sorts of things. For me, it's the conversations before and after class. Hey, Dr. Austin, hey, what's up? Well, I've got the, okay, that's great. We'll make it happen. It's no problem. And then you hope that everybody's that welcoming. I've met my colleagues. Not everyone has the same experience. There's the same kind of attitude as each other. But you hope they have enough good experiences that it gives them confidence to keep doing it. Because we're all just trying to prepare them for what's next. And whether it's in relationships or education or employment or nonprofit work or whatever it is, they have to be able to advocate for themselves. And so for my daughter, I'm very clear about, hey, she plays sports. She has to be the one to talk to the refs. I hear through these things. If they get knocked off my head, I will not hear a whistle. She has to be the one who explains that. She has to be the one to do these things because it's her body, it's her sense, it's her ability it's her communication. And so whatever we can do to just empower them and then to recognize that they're doing it, and when they do it well, give them that. Good job. Way to go. Really acknowledge it. I think just give them as many reps as possible and encouragement. And the school system can do that too, right? In the 504 and IEP meetings, I hope you're doing that. Hey, what do you need? Which of these is most important to you? With my daughter, she can have sound Bluetooth directly to her processors, through which she, cochlear implant processors, or she can have sound field systems. I don't know which one's better for her. The school has to ask her, and then the school has to provide what she needs. Yeah.
As a professor, if a student learns in a different way that your other students don't, do you ever tailor a midterm or a final so they can grasp the information in the way that they learn? Or do professors not do that and they are...
I don't know if I've ever, that's a really good question. I don't know if I've ever said, hey, Sally, I've given people opportunities to read something else. Hey, but sometimes, look, this reading's not for, I teach modern U.S. history. There's a lot that's troubling. And hey, look, if reading about this isn't for you for whatever reason, we'll read something else. It helps us develop the same skill. As a professor, I try to design assignments that we have exams, we've got just kind of participation, kind of do the readings and respond to it. We've got other opportunities. I try to create a wide range of assessments that give students many different opportunities to prove that they've developed mastery of material and skills. And so I don't know if I've done my job right. This is kind of UDL's kind of principles. Then if I've done my job right, everyone will get a chance to kind of.
We were using that term, and I bet, it's universal design for learning. So you're designing your learning to meet the needs of a diverse range of learners.
But for example, for a final assessment, I can say, look, you can write a traditional essay, 8 to 10 pages on a topic of your choice. You can compare how these two books dealt with the same topic. You can take an exam, or you can do a timeline where you tell me what the 3 most important themes of this period are, and you explain the key changing points.
Okay,
So
as I understand it, it sounds like the student and the family reveals the IEP or whatever, and you get your accommodation for that particular department of the college or university, and then it's documented, and then it's up to the student to approach their professors and let them know what they need on an individual basis.
Sort of, but this the way that he just described how he might diversify the final outcome of the class, these are the learning outcomes, and how each student demonstrates the learning outcomes might look different. That's not a requirement by ADA. That's part of the culture and the norms of this institution and maybe just his classroom.
So it's really
right?
up to the family and the student to find a school that matches how what kind of culture and how they prefer to teach the kids and see if it's a good match for them.
right. So if your kid is not, look, exams aren't your kid's thing, but your kid's taking macroeconomics at a school that has 400 students, they're taking 3 exams, and that's how they're getting their grade. there probably will not be, unless I'm really wrong, a way to intervene where the Office of Accessibility tells the professor, hey, you really need to create more of a group project thing for this. That comes into real academic freedom issues. A lot of professors wouldn't be receptive to that.
So
Yes,
the professor's gonna teach the way they.
and the professor's going to,
They're gonna hand out the exams to
Yeah.
everyone the way they want to, and it's up to the student and the professor to come to an agreement on what works for them, is that?
on how,
If the
in
professor
real talk, I was also on the town school committee and served on the CPAC committee. So I've had a lot of thoughts about how the school creates a culture where people are, we test students in ways that are really appropriate for them and assess them in a lot of different ways. At the college level, it doesn't really work that way. It's, you know, your student, if your student appears in my class, the syllabus is set, I hand out the syllabus, and we figure out ways through the documented accommodations to allow the students to do those assessments, but there's nobody sitting in the back of the room saying, hey, Brad, you have to redesign all these things.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you're talking about their list of schools that do this well and don't. And once you're on campus, my guess is offices like this will be able to identify, tell your students, hey, don't take Austin's class. Take Darian, right? You know, Brad's not good at this, take that guy or take her. Maybe not official list, but you know.
Yeah, I'd say that there are things that are required for the faculty member to do, and then there's flexibility and arrangements that a faculty member can do. And so what you're talking about is like modification of like assignments or assessments, and I would say almost universally, they're not going to change those outcomes, but they might help support a student to get to that outcome. So at Berkeley, for example, students have to prepare 6 pieces to be able to perform in front of their faculty. So I often get, well, can I prepare 3 pieces because 6 is too much? That's the design of the course. You're going to have to prepare 6, and you have to work with your faculty in order to do that. Are there faculty who are more flexible than others? Absolutely. I feel like students talk about that a lot within their community and will say, take so-and-so's faculty or this class because they really provide a lot of tutoring options or one-on-one sessions with students. But from an office point of view, we would say, no, faculty, you have to give extra time. So in that quiz, you have to make sure that they have their extra time. You don't have to change it where they only have to do 10 questions instead of the 15.
Or I've never gotten a request for, I mean, look, we're writing in my class. They're not, but for some history classes, maybe it's fill in the blank or whatever it is. Probably not the college level, but like in high school, a typical accommodation, some people get a word bank and some people get, sentence starters. No, that just has never, maybe it happens, but it hasn't happened once in my 27 years of teaching. Yeah.
Excuse me, my kid is one sentence.
Mm.
She's a one, the way she thinks,
Mm-hmm.
she just writes. And is
It's a long sentence then.
one sentence.
All right.
So as far as accommodation, if it's not an English class,
Mhm.
like how would she address for the accommodation?
I think that if I was working with the student and as a first-year student, then I might introduce some assistive technology into her life and see how that might help her develop some some independence around here. Because there's a lot of ways that technology can help with language, whether it's having a hard time getting it out verbally or in writing or taking a brainstorm and trying to organize it. The human one-on-one can do that, but technology has enhanced the ability to be able to do that too. So thinking about like, here's a toolbox that you're gonna carry with you through college. What tools can you put in there that will help you with each class, with the real world when you graduate? And technology is a big one of those tools, especially in that area. I don't know if you.
But if I see that exam, if she writes that one sentence on exam, then I read it for ideas. And I write, this is all one sentence. I could draw attention to it. Because we are trying to help people communicate as well, but I assess it based on the ideas and information it contains.
I'm really trying to become an expert in
Yeah.
the disability And one of the things that I think all of you would benefit from hearing is like, so K through 12, we're guaranteed access and success. Office of Disability guarantees only access.
Yes.
So it kind of like feeds into the fact that faculty are individual people who are content experts, and you gotta find the ones, I think, who do a little bit more than just give you the access.
Well, again, go back to your point earlier, the people with terminal degrees teaching your students in college will have really specialized expertise, but no training at all often in how to teach.
Well, so one thing I learned recently, because I've been in higher ed now, this will be my 7th year, and I came from special education, K-12, I worked in high school, transition plans, all that, then stepped into higher ed, and my first place working was Curry College. What attracted me to Curry College was that they had the Pell program. And so I've been working on a grant from the Department of Education with the Statistics Department. And it's a 3-year longitudinal study. We're in our 2nd year. And we're researching what is the catalyst for teaching UDL, for using UDL to teach statistics. So we're in St. Juan presenting, and we were bringing the conversation nationally to what we found. And I was shocked at how the UDL conversation has like barely hit higher ed. And so that's like, I guess what you need to think about, like when you're looking at institutions, they're gonna be doing research. What kind of research are they doing? Are they doing research that supports type of learning that's inclusive and accessible and guarantees success, even though we're not required to? Or are they doing research that's different? That had, like, the research of the institution is gonna shape their identity, right? So if you're looking for a college that goes beyond, I would look at what type of research they're doing. I think that would be a strong indicator of what they prioritize as an institution. I know Salem State, for example, has a very diverse population, and they also, no matter what the program is, whether it's education or nursing, like they have a strong reputation of being successful and having and being accessible for students of all different types of backgrounds, right? So thinking about like each institution kind of has their own identity. I don't know much about Berkeley, but
I see.
We had
It's
one-
about 10 o'clock now, but I still want to open up a question that maybe we could.
I'm on sabbatical, I'm not in a hurry, but other people have jobs.
Yeah, I just had a question. So, like she said earlier, I went to college a long, long time ago, and there was always a requirement to be considered a full-time student. You had to take so many classes. Listening to what accommodations might look like, I can't help but wonder if perhaps a lighter load of not taking the most amount of credits per semester would be a fit for our son. Does that work as an accommodation? Can you still be considered full-time but be taking maybe one less class?
Sure. Once you become,
Yep, pass the mic over here.
I think the federal requirement is 12 credits in a traditional credit system. 12 credits is full-time, and at Salem State, once you pay for 12, you get up to 18. The next 6 credits are free. So some students are trying to get through in the quickest, cheapest way. They'll overload. I know students who've done that in the past.
Dr. Austin as a professor.
Yeah, so she can say he's lying the whole time. But other students, I advise and say, look, maybe 12 credits is for you. And then you pick up one in summer. You take, if you know, it costs a little bit extra, but we're a fairly affordable college choice anyway. And so then you're still getting your path to degree is usually 120 credits. 30 credits a year times 4 gets you 120. So if it's 12 plus 3, 12 plus 3, right? 1 winter, 1 summer, that still gets you to 30. You're still on path. Or if it takes you 4.5 years, no one cares. No one cares. And so if you're worried about your student's ability to kind of handle college and all the changes, then yeah, 4 classes, a light credit load the first time, you'll have 7 more semesters to make it up. That's actually, I think, really good advice.
I would add that's an evidence-based practice for neurodivergent students, so that's like.
So our son is autistic and he does want to go to Berkeley.
Awesome.
So I'm like,
I'll give you
Here
my
we go.
card, please. Yeah.
Well, Allie said that.
Well, I think from like a parent point of view too, you'll often hear like through admissions, through other offices, like we're gonna get your kid out of here in 4 years. You're gonna be able to maximize your experience. And then you come to these offices and we're like, what can we do to support you? If it's gonna take you 5 years, it's gonna take you 5 years. Or if it takes you 4 years and 4 semesters of summer classes or transfer credits, let's work together to figure out what your need is. So sometimes there's like an enrollment push that you'll hear from like the narrative of like the bigger institution. At Berkeley specifically, and it's gonna depend on every institution, it's required to be a full-time student, right? So students have to go through a process to get an acceptance to not be part-time or full-time and go part-time, which is 6 to 11 credits. And so that allows students to have some flexibility, especially in their first couple years. They'll take a lighter course load, make up some of those classes and other, semesters, transfer credits, and then by the time they get into their major, they're like, I'm good to be a full-time student. So it's really, I would say, a beautiful question to ask every time you're going to an accepted students day. When you're working with an admissions counselor, like what is the requirement to be full-time or part-time? Because there are other institutions where you, especially in a community college point of view, where you can just take a couple classes and they're not saying you have to be on this specific trajectory.
One thing I would add to that is in doing the credit math of getting you to 120 credits, if your student is bringing in anything from AP or dual enrollment or something like that, then they're already ahead. So if they AP out of U.S. history, something that counts as 2 classes, U.S. 1 and U.S. 2, then they can go 12-12, and there's still a total 30 credit accumulation, 30 credit count after the first year. So if they are bringing in anything else from other work they've done or tests they've passed, then they're not behind at all. They're just not as far ahead as they were before. But that's a great way to kind of ease into college, and again, it's evidence-based.
All right, any other final questions?
Thanks, y'all.